So people get ripped off all the time.
Right. Well,
for
let me ask you a question about getting ripped off.
Okay.
I hear that a little bird tells me that you had something to do with the whole Star Wars trilogy. Is that true?
I didn't know you spoke bird language.
I did. This bird just...
well, I can't believe we're quite drifting on this, but I will answer your questions because you've been so kind to answer all of my questions.
You guys came down here, so I want to find out about this Star Wars thing, because my whole family's been wrapped up in Star Wars through multiple generations.
Well, it's an interesting story. I, in my life, have come across some peculiar circumstances. I was studying to be a Waldorf teacher at an institute that trains Waldorf teachers. It's a private school system. And my boss came in and said, I want you to come out here and talk with this lady. And I said, okay, whatever. So I came out of the bookshop and I went, and here was Marcia Lucas. Of course,
George Lucas's what?
Yes,
wife?
Yes, who people don't understand. She's the one who got the Oscar because she was the greatest and most cutting-edge film editor in Hollywood at the time. And George married her. They had worked on one of his movies together, American Graffiti, I believe. But she was also very famous. She'd worked with many of the great producers and directors out there. So I come into this room and my boss and my other boss at the time, we sit down and we're with Marcia Lucas. And my boss says, this is my student. I don't know what he introduced me as, but he's going to take care of all of your needs. And I said, oh, wow. I don't even know why I'm here, so I'm going to take care of your needs. So then he excuses himself, walks out of the room, and my other boss says, well, you're not going to need me because I don't have anything to do with this kind of stuff. So,
so he leaves you there by yourself?
So he leaves me there, and there's two other people there. They didn't speak the whole time. For 3 days, we took George Lucas's script that had been rejected twice. He had a contract to make 2 movies, 2 science fiction movies, after he'd done American Graffiti and done another science fiction movie that was so horrible that it was a complete flop. But he had these contracts, and so he had submitted 2 different treatments, screenplays, and they rejected them wholesale. So Marcia Lucas had turned to my boss, whose name was Werner Glass, who ran this teacher training institute, because she had sent her children to the Waldorf school, and they're into storytelling, and they're into all this nice stuff. So she said, well, I should turn to them. So she came to Detroit, where we were, sat down with her, and when she read me this treatment, I found, you can read these treatments. As a matter of fact, the guy who wrote the true history of Star Wars has been in communication with me. He's writing a 4th book, not with George Lucas, this time to reveal...
Well, we've never heard of you before.
No, you've not heard of me. That's because I did that gratis. I was paid nothing for it, and I was happy to give my ideas. But basically, what really happened was I'm looking at this screenplay, this treatment. It was horrible. The names are horrible. It was all childish. It was pathetic. There was no plot. It was all about kyber crystals and about a guy and a girl who fight over kyber crystals, and then you get the kyber crystal and you win the day. It's like really,
You mean
really,
it's sort of overproduced tech?
It was bad tech. It was worse than a B-grade movie. They rejected it twice, okay? That's how bad it was. So she said, help us with this. So I said, well, first off, the story, there's no plot. So let's, what I get here is that George Lucas started writing a children's story when he was very young, and Chewbacca was his dog, of course, and so these characters were his childhood characters, and he was a guy who went out in space and was a space cowboy. Really a bad plot. Had no spiritual intent, had no resolve. It wasn't a true schemata. It wasn't a complete story. So I said to her, well, Marcia, I think what you really want is an adult fairy tale, a space fairy tale that's going to be a musical, because it was supposed to be an opera. People don't even realize it was a space musical opera. That's the reason John Williams was hired. But anyway, I said, I think what you want is a fairy tale. Yeah, he's incredible and did a great job on it. And by the way, George Lucas and Marcia, all of them, they did a great job on most of it. Of course, I have complaints because they didn't follow the story, and so they changed some very principal things. For instance, Yoda was never even supposed to be a Jedi warrior. He was comic relief. Alec Guinness was going to be the one to train the young Jedi, not Yoda. And then when Yoda started, picking up a lightsaber and trying to kill people, that was about the end for me, because Obi-Wan Kenobi was, again, they weren't supposed to use their weapons to attack. Their weapons were also shields, and when you attacked them, their shield would then send back the energy to the person who sent it. Could never miss. You attack a Jedi warrior, you're dead. They didn't attack you. They didn't, because what I did is I took the stories from all the best books and the best versions of stories I've ever heard, made it into a fairy tale, basically. And also, just like, basically, Dorothy and her three characters, that's thinking, feeling, and willing. So The Wizard of Oz is in fact a fairy tale, and it's the same type of fairy tale that we turned that into.
So who wrote that book, The Power of Myth?
Joseph Campbell.
Joseph Campbell. Now, I saw his interviews with Bill Moyers, and I think everybody like me's got the impression that he came up with this storyline. You're saying that's not true?
No, and he didn't use Joseph Campbell either. He now has said, when he sold the company to Disney for $4.5 billion, and also he had made $4.5 billion off of merchandising, which he's the real genius at. No one has ever done anything like that. It's been in the stores continuously.
Invested in much of it.
As a matter of fact, your grandchildren are dressed up like that.
Exactly, just the other day, Halloween.
Everywhere you go, everywhere. You can't go anywhere that you don't see this merchandising, right? Well, that's the genius of him. His wife was a genius with editing, film editing, and basically the story was a good story because it's a completely integrated story. They left the end off, and that's the reason they're still struggling with 3 more movies, and they don't have a good completion. They don't have a good end because they forgot, they drifted off, because every fairy tale.
So, you know, I know a little bit about intellectual property law and especially copyright law. And when people contribute primary content like this to a work, they have to be given credit. I mean, if you don't give credit to somebody who's contributed to your intellectual property, that's called inequitable conduct. It's a fancy lawyer word for fraud. So I don't get it. Why isn't your name come up anywhere?
Well, because what I didn't tell you is that Waldorf education, and I was a Waldorf teacher, we don't believe in movies. We don't let the students watch movies. We don't let them watch television. So when I helped, it was to try to bring our side of storytelling up onto the silver screen.
Well, it doesn't really matter what you believe. It's about what the law says, that if you are a contributor to a copyright, you have to be given credit.
I was not given any credit. And I did it for free, and I did it out of just trying to help. And I worked for 3 days, and I didn't think much about it. About a year, I don't remember, sometime after that, when the movie started to come out, Marcia contacted my boss and said, all Waldorf schools we will give them a copy of the movie, and they can play this movie in a theater as a fundraiser before it ever opens.
I see.
So they offered us what should have been millions and millions of dollars.
That's nice, but it's still not copyright law.
And what did Waldorf schools do? Rejected that offer because we don't believe in movies.
Wow.
So
that doesn't really matter, by the way.
I know what you're saying is so right, and I'm going to say one more thing, and that's that Marcia then turned Kathleen Kennedy, Spielberg's assistant, who now is as big as Spielberg and producing and directing in movies. And she called, and I talked to her on the phone, and for years I was in a conversation with her, a long conversation, about the Indiana Jones movies, because she actually became the person in charge.
So you were in that too?
Those came from me. All those stories came from me.
Oh, wow. Gee,
but
you're blowing my mind
except for the Nazis and all the stupid Nazi stuff. But the content of the fairy tale story that's found in each of the Indiana Jones, I was paid for that, $100 an hour. And I sold her huge amounts of books, which then went into the Skywalker Ranch library. So if you don't believe my story, go look, you'll see the Mayflower Bookshop. Now, we were given credit, so I'm throwing this out to ask your opinion. At the end of all the Indiana Jones movies, they say the last credit they give is, and special thanks to Mayflower Light and Production, I think they call it. We made up a name because I worked at the Mayflower Bookshop. And so my boss at the bookshop said, we'll call it Mayflower Light or whatever. So they did give us credit in the first time that I'd see these movies, and then it was removed and it was no longer at the bottom. So they paid me $100 an hour, and I talked to her for hundreds and hundreds of hours as we worked through the plots of these movies. And then she came and visited us, and so I met with her, and I never got to meet Spielberg, and never got to meet Lucas, but I do know that the Skywalker Ranch is chock full of all those books. But then I had to distill it into something like a 3rd grade level So I took the entire Grail story and turned it into a fairy tale, which could be told in less than a minute. That was that. So each of those, even the last Indiana Jones movie was actually taken from a story I'd already written called Sunbirth. So I worked with them, but I thought I was just trying to be helpful. And I was naive. I know nothing about patents or what you're telling me about. I'm only learning this by looking at your case. So yes, it is true that industrial espionage is out there. They will steal every idea you have. That's a fact. They'll steal your patents. The government will even do it and call it legal. Yeah. And when you, I guess the lesson to learn here is when you share your intellectual property, even when it's as simple as telling somebody a fairy tale that they use and turn into a movie, I guess we have to be very careful about that.
Well, you can, if somebody's intent on stealing your stuff, they're going to figure a way to do it, and they'll just pay more lawyers to write more crap. And the principle is your property is your property, and my property is my property. That's the constitutional principle. Not in a socialist world. In the world my friends from the Soviet Union were in, nothing was their property. And we now know what happened to that. They collapsed. We're headed that way, I think. But back to your situation, I think that if you made a contribution, you need proper credit because that's the way the law prescribes it. If they're trying to ignore you, that's a different issue. If they paid you and they think that absolves them, no, it doesn't.
Well, it's interesting because this only really came out when I wrote an article that then got printed in a Waldorf school in their newsletter. And at the top, they put a banner. And in that banner, it said, oh, this proves what we always heard as a rumor, that George Lucas sent his children to the Waldorf school, and that somehow the Waldorf school and what's called anthroposophy, the philosophy of Waldorf schools, is somehow behind Star Wars. And so they printed that. Well, George Lucas's publicist contacted that school and said, we are going to sue you because George Lucas did not send his children to the Waldorf school. They were Marcia's children. Yeah. And George Lucas was the sole inspirer, and George Lucas, the two things in the banner were false. So he threatened to sue them. So they retracted it.
Sure, typical bully conduct.
But they read my whole article that describes everything I'm describing to you in great detail.
Yeah,
and they did not threaten me, so I know that he knows that it's the truth, because he would have threatened me if it wasn't. And the same thing with the Indiana Jones, because remember, Lucas and Spielberg were linked after the second Star Wars movie all the way through to the end of the Indiana Jones movies. And Kathleen Kennedy ran both those companies for them. And that's who I talked with so often, right? So really, when it comes down to it, George Lucas has basically...
Interesting. Wow. You've been screwed too.
Yes, I just like the book that you want to print about your experience called
Screwed.
Screwed. Yeah, because you were innocent and I was innocent, and really I didn't care. Right. And so I guess I was taken advantage of.
Well, this isn't the way our country's supposed to operate. We got to get back to the way our system was designed and the brilliance of our founders, and we just got to do it. And all this abuse of people is wrong.
Well, here's what I suggest, since you brought this up. I suggest everyone listening to this needs to inform George Lucas he needs to send me a check.
There you go.
And then I'm going to turn around and give that check to you so that you can, in fact, continue to fund your legal case here. As a matter of fact, I wanted to ask this, and it's nowhere in our conversations that I've noted this. Is there any way people can legally financially help you in your legal battle? You don't have, like everyone else, a thing at the bottom where you can donate anywhere, do you? Or you don't have a website?
Our shareholders are helping now, and if somebody wanted to, yeah, we would welcome support. But I don't have anything formal on our website right now. They would just have to send the check to us at our office.
I believe that if your case wins, one way or the other, whether it's executive action or lawsuit or whatever, it will absolutely transform America, because all the people involved in your situation will then also be held accountable for their other crimes when we start to lift the blinders from our eyes.
There's a lot of people that have been abused by this system.
Absolutely. Well, I guess I'm in the same bit of a boat with you.
Yes, you are. Sounds like it.
I guess we just got to keep bailing and keep these boats afloat.
Exactly.
Thank you for the conversation, Michael.
You're welcome.